So for the last couple of months or so, Sega have been teasing that they've got some big announcement to make. And it turned out that this big announcement was the news that they're going to be releasing a Megadrive Mini 2. Oh, be still my beating heart. Yet another Megadrive collection. Joy. Yeah, you could argue this one's a little bit different because of the fact they're actually sticking some Mega CD games on it, but it's not exactly groundbreaking stuff really, is it? I can't help but feel that they've missed an opportunity here to release something a bit different on the market than yet another mini console, and my personal hope was that something different, following on from the more arcade-centric direction they went in with the Astro City Mini, was that they might consider releasing a miniature racing cabinet of some sort. Now, just in case you've been living under a rock or on another planet for the last year or so, I thought it would probably be useful just to have a very quick recap on the history of mini consoles and the subsequent wave of mini arcade cabinets that have appeared over the last couple of years. Ever since the NES Classic launched in 2016, mini plug-and-play consoles have been surprisingly popular. They usually come preloaded with around 20 to 40 games in emulated form, and multiple options for how you want to display them on your modern HD TV. When it was first released, the demand for the NES Classic quickly outstripped supply, with scumbaggy scalpers being quick to capitalise on this situation, buying as many as they could, so that they could resell them with extreme price markups. The release of the NES Classic on the scene quickly triggered a surge of interest in the concept of repackaging old games in new miniaturised hardware. Nintendo followed this up with the release of a mini SNES, with Sega and Sony also quick to jump on the bandwagon, with a mini Megadrive and PS1 around the same time. A mini Turbografx 16 was also released. Interestingly, this was released by Konami, as Hudson Soft, the designers of the original Japanese iteration of the console, the PC Engine, were now defunct. The trend for mini consoles then progressed to arcade collections, with Capcom releasing their home arcade plug-and-play twin fight stick device, and SNK releasing the Neo Geo Mini, which actually took things a step further than just being a simple plug-and-play console, by actually recreating a Neo Geo arcade cabinet in cute micro form, complete with its own 3.5-inch LCD monitor. Sega were quick once again to get in on this action with the release of the Astro City Mini, a product they released in celebration of their 60th anniversary as a company. A miniaturised tabletop version of its Astro City arcade cabinet, which was a huge success in the 1990s, once again with its own built-in screen, but also, just like the SNK offering, also providing the option to plug it into your HD TV. The Astro City Mini also came with its own range of peripherals, like added joysticks and pads that you could plug into it. All of the games included on it are the original arcade versions rather than the generally inferior ports seen on the Master System and Sega Mega Drive. The Astro City also brought home some games that had, up until this point, never had legitimate home ports before, like Golden Axe: The Revenge of Death Adder and Arabian Fight. It proved successful enough to warrant a follow-on Astro City tabletop with a vertically oriented tape mode screen, ideal for vertically scrolling shoot-em-ups, which is due for release sometime around summer 2022. Taito have also gone on to release their own mini tabletop arcade cabinet called the Egret Mini 2 that aesthetically looks quite similar to the Astro City. The interesting thing with the Egret though is that the screen can be popped out and rotated so that it can be played in both horizontal and vertical tape mode. I bloody love this action, it's such a cool feature that they've added onto the machine. Sega also released a set of 4 absolutely tiny Game Gear miniatures as part of their 60th anniversary celebration too, each loaded with 4 games, but you could argue that these are really more of a novelty item as the screen's a bit too small to really play on them comfortably. As well as the micro consoles, a trend has also emerged roughly around the same sort of time period for miniature arcade cabinets to become a thing, with the company's New Wave Toys and Numskull producing a range of 1/6 and 1/4 size mini arcade cabinets respectively. The Numskull quarter scale arcade cabinets aim for accuracy down to the last detail, whereas the new wave toy ones, being on a slightly smaller scale still, do make some slight concessions for the sake of usability, like slightly oversized joysticks and buttons. So with this type of specialised hardware and the retro games they play being very much in fashion at the moment, for me it begs the question, why hasn't someone made a racing cabinet version of one? And by someone, I mean, obviously, Sega, the uncontested heavyweight champion of the world when it came to arcade racing games back in the 80s, 90s and early 2000s. I mean, who wouldn't want a mini racing cabinet loaded up with classics such as Outrun, Daytona USA, Sega Rally, Virtua Racing, Power Drift, Super Hang-On, Radmobile, Super Monaco GP, Outrunners, and Outrun 2. There were also a whole slew of Sega arcade races from back then that never received any form of home conversions, such as Scud Race, Daytona USA 2, Sega Race TV, Le Mans 24, Indy 500, Racing Hero, Dirt Devils, F1 Super Lap, and Rad Rally. Some of these games would present a bit of a challenge to bring out now, owing to the fact that they featured a lot of licensed vehicles in them, or specific brands associated with racing, like the now obsolete BPR racing tournament associated with Scud Race, not to mention the licensed cars featured in it, like the McLaren F1, the Ferrari and the Porsche. But I'm sure that this is something that could be relatively easily dealt with by the retro Sega port masters at M2, who were responsible for a lot, or possibly all, I'm not sure, of the Sega Ages titles that came out on the Nintendo 3DS and Switch. Because as I understand it, these games weren't just straight up emulations and did require a little bit of rebuilding from the ground up, so to speak. Particularly with stuff like the Superscaler games that needed the implementation of the stereoscopic 3D effect to work for the 3DS games, with a few graphical tweaks here and there. In particular, in relation to what I'm talking about, the fact that the original Ferrari Testarossa model was changed for the M2 port of Outrun, and the fact that, being the pros that they are, they then went on to add in a load of additional colours for the car, as well as some slight changes in the bodywork for the different types of the car that you could use, depending on which of the unlockable perks that you used with it. So if Sega was serious about releasing a mini arcade racing cabinet, the next question should be, what sort of form should a mini arcade racer cabinet take? Now this is something that I have talked about very briefly before in one of my older videos, the follow-on to my which version of Outrun 2 is the best video. I very briefly talked at the end of it about a few DIY projects I'd seen online where people had taken matters into their own hands and made some miniature racing cabinets that went in very different design directions but both ended up with very, very cool looking products at the end. One was by a gent called CIRCUITBEARD, who had converted an old Tomy racing toy into a tiny mini Outrun themed tabletop racing cabinet. It was a really impressive looking project. It didn't just have a swanky new screen and miniature modern PC innards, it also had an LED dashboard that updates with the actual real-time game values, and the steering wheel had haptic feedback, just like a real Outrun cabinet. Another was an awesome looking scratch-built, scaled-down mini upright Outrun cabinet, created by a guy called Luis Miguel Mayer, that was capable of playing multiple races. He's also made a Daytona USA themed one too. Never mind Sega. If New Wave Toys or Numskull produced a scaled down mini upright Outrun or Daytona cabinet like this, I would purchase it day one and shower them with as much cash as they needed to make it a reality. Go on guys, you know you want to do it. CIRCUITBEARD also made another Outrun themed cabinet, this time a fantastic looking Bartop style mini desktop racer based on the aesthetics of the massive Outrun Deluxe sit-in hydraulic cabinet. A gentleman by the name of Berunours, I'm undoubtedly pronouncing that incorrectly, was inspired by this design and made a slightly scaled up version of it. They then also went on to do an awesome Bartop style Super Hang-On cabinet too, using motorbike handlebars instead of a steering wheel. All of these custom made DIY arcade racing cabinets are incredible looking, and the sort of thing I'd love to see come out as an official product from Sega. I'm going to put links to the full versions of all these videos in my video description, so please do check them out. I'd be happy getting a miniature arcade racer in any of these forms. Quarter size scale model, Bartop, desktop, mini tabletop, any version. And would be prepared to pay top dollar for it too if it was done right. Admittedly, something like the mini stand-up Outrun cabinet Luis made would probably be a bit too small for comfortably playing games on for a long period of time, but I'd still very happily buy one as a novelty item just because I think they just look so goddamn cool. And as we've seen from these Sega 60th anniversary Game Gear minis I mentioned earlier, Sega are not above releasing something as a novelty electronic item that's form factor might limit its actual playability a bit. Admittedly, the cost of making something like this would be a lot more than a Game Gear Mini, but I bet you there would be a market for this amongst adult collectors that have got a little bit more disposable income. Added practicality could be added to something like a mini stand-up cabinet though, through the release of additional peripherals like a separate accelerator and brake pedal combo that you could plug into it via a couple of USB ports around the back, and maybe an HDMI out just like the Astro City Mini so you could plug it into your TV. The separate plug and play gas and brake pedals are also what I think would work best for something like a big Bartop sized tabletop arcade racer cabinet. A proper Daytona USA style 4-way 8-shifter would be a must in something like this too, maybe with some sort of option to convert it to a simplified up-down shifter, perhaps in a similar way to how the Egret Mini can swap between an 8-way and a 4-way directional arcade stick. Now, some time ago somebody left a comment on one of my videos where I was demonstrating some multiplayer link-up gameplay using an emulator like Model 2 emulator or Supermodel, saying that they wish that some company or other would go down the Pandora's box route of a bootleg 20 million games in one tabletop arcade kit, but as a ready-to-go multiplayer arcade racing system. So instead of a tabletop system with the two joysticks with the classic Street Fighter 2 6-button layout, you got a system with two steering wheels and the ability to output to two different monitors, and all the multiplayer emulators pre-set up and ready to go and configured to display properly. I think this is definitely an interesting idea, and I'm sure there's some enterprising bootleggers out there that could definitely run with this concept and come up with something. Something else that's just worth talking about here as well is that if we're just talking about Sega producing a miniature tabletop arcade racer of a similar sort of form factor to the Astro City Mini, isn't expecting a tiny system like that to be able to run Model 3 stuff like Scud Race and Daytona USA 2 a bit of a stretch? To which I would answer, not at all. Handheld portable Model 3 arcade racer awesomeness is now possible via Steam Deck. It really does just absolutely blow my mind to think that these games that used to run on such expensive hardware back in the 90s, I mean these arcade boards were just so far ahead of anything that the home market could do at the time, and they cost thousands of pounds. And now you can squeeze these games into something that's about the same size, or probably a lot smaller actually, than a Sega Game Gear. Absolutely incredible stuff, amazing. Now just moving on to something slightly different. At the time I made the which version of Outrun 2 follow-up video which I referenced earlier, I'd also mentioned that I'd like to see Arcade 1-Up do an Outrun cabinet. And of course in the subsequent time since then, this is something which has actually happened. Now I've never actually played on an Arcade 1-Up Outrun cabinet in real life, or even so much as seen one. And the chances are I'm probably never likely to either, as they seem to be exclusive to North America and Canada, with no plans for release over here in the UK. Judging by the reviews and videos of it I've seen online though, it would seem the expectation in my head of how I'd hoped it would turn out seems to be a bit far removed from the actual reality of it, The overall impression I get from these reviews is that the cabinet is generally okay, but does leave a bit to be desired. Things like the very flimsy feeling plastic pedals, no haptic or force feedback in any of the games, an odd lack of Sega branding on the cabinet anywhere. There's probably a reason behind that, but I don't know what it is. And the sit-down variant being a bit too small to comfortably house a normal-sized man. Even without ever actually casting my eyes on a real-life model, the design of it looks a teeny bit naff to me, like the Fisher-Price equivalent of a real stand-up Outrun cabinet, with the oversized steering wheel and the crap yellow sticker where once there was a proper Ferrari logo, and what to my eye looks like the weirdly oversized grey dashboard, and the lack of the inlaid fitted monitor bezel that the proper cabinet had. The effect that you can see on the original Outrun cabinet here on the right, where it looks like the CRT monitor is actually slightly sunk into the machine itself. Also, from a purely aesthetic point of view, I'm not a big fan of the way they've mixed up the upright and the deluxe cabinet's design here when you put the sit down bit on. I think it probably would have worked better if they'd actually had a separate stand up and sit down version of the cabinet. I mean, if we add the CIRCUITBEARD Bartop back in, I think we can all agree that that would definitely work better as a design with the sit down part. And the whole aesthetics of the Bartop design here just looks so much nicer than the official A1 product. I know in the past Arcade 1UP have gone back to revisit some of their designs for their Street Fighter cabinets, so maybe possibly this is something that they might come back to in the future, another version of Outrun. I think it's pretty unlikely, but hey, you never know. Certainly the upright Arcade 1UP Ridge Racer cabinet that came after it looked a hell of a lot nicer. And I believe it also had some haptic feedback type functions as well. Now, in all honesty, I'm not really sure what sort of style I'd actually like an official Sega racing cabinet that's got lots of games on it to take. Now, I know the title of the video was about a miniature racing cabinet, but I think if I was really pushed to make a decision, probably something along the size of the Berunours Barcade would be ideal. And it's not like it even needs any redesigning, you know, CIRCUITBEARD absolutely nailed the aesthetics of that thing originally. It looks absolutely beautiful. I think if Sega made something like that, I would snap it up in an instant. But having said that, I would also be equally happy with a miniature arcade racing cabinet about the same size as the Astro City Mini, particularly as well if it did give you some sort of option to plug it into the TV, and it came with something like a brake and accelerator pedal that you could plug into it. Another bonus feature to having them in this slightly smaller form is the fact that they would then be ideal for link-up multiplayer. Just imagine linking 16 of these little bad boys up for some multiplayer Daytona USA 2 fun times. In an ideal world, I'd also love to see Numskull or Nuo Toys make a quarter-sized upright arcade racer. Ideally something like a stand-up Outrun, Super Hang-On or a Daytona USA. If we're talking one-off mini arcade racer cabinets though, it wouldn't necessarily even need to be a quarter-size Sega offering. I'd be happy, wait, let me rephrase that, I'd be extremely happy with something like a mini Chase HQ by Taito or a miniature Ridge Racer by Namco. I'm basically just desperate for any kind of an upright racer in that scale that I can put next to my mini Street Fighter 2 and Bubble Bobble cabinets. So anyway, a fair bit to unpack and process there in terms of options for something like a mini racer of some sort moving forward. What do you guys and gals think about this idea? Is a mini arcade racing cabinet something you'd be interested in buying? Have you got any preference for what sort of form it would come in? Are there any other games other than Sega ones that you think should get included in something like this? Please do let me know in the comments. The fact that certain big Sega arcade racers from the 1990s, like Scud Race, Daytona USA 2 and Indy 500 never got home ports, is still a bit of a bone of contention with a certain subset of Sega-loving gamers of a certain age like me. In much the same way that the Astro City was a good way for Sega to finally release a couple of arcade classics that had never had a home port before, like the aforementioned Golden Axe Revenge of Death Adder, I think a mini racing cabinet would be a fantastic way for Sega to finally do justice to those previously unreleased arcade races. And it's something that I would happily hand over my cold, hard-earned cash to Sega for, rather than something like a Sega Megadrive Mini 2, which, to be honest, I've got absolutely fuck all interest in. Anyway, this seems as good a point as any for me to wrap things up here. As always, if you've enjoyed what I've been talking about here, please don't forget to drop me in a comment with your thoughts. And if you want to see more content like this, like and subscribe and check out some of my back catalogue. I've been Mr. Thunderwing. Catch you again sometime soon. Bye!